This was supposed to be a lighthearted video shot in a day looking at a weird device that no one remembers. But in trying to even demonstrate this, I had to trudge back through one of the worst time periods for personal music rights, and man, did I reopen some old wounds that I'd forgotten about. Today, we will be taking a look at the iRiver PMC 120, one of the devices using Microsoft's Portable Media Center based on Windows Mobile. On paper, everything about this is amazing, and I thought I would love this thing. It was around the same cost as the iPod at the time, but was more capable. It's another example of how Windows Mobile was powerful, but never got any credit. It integrates with the excellent Windows XP Media Center. But it is let down and hamstrung by Microsoft cowering to a group that anyone who dealt with music in this era will be very familiar with, the RIAA. It was also let down though by Microsoft themselves, as they continually tried to combat the iPod. Let's start this journey from the beginning of these devices to understand some of the aftershocks we will be dealing with. In the late 90s, the first MP3 players began hitting the market, and immediately the RIAA tried to put a stop to this, suing Diamond for its Rio PMP300 due to its ability to play illegally downloaded MP3s. Music piracy during the late 90s and early 2000s was easy. You buy a CD, use simple software to rip it to MP3s, and then upload it to any number of websites that distributed files, which other people can then download for free. The claim against the Rio was that it existed only for this purpose, but the same concept had been legally explored before by VCR's recording ability. You were allowed to make backups and personally use media you own how you want. So the Rio triumphed, paving the way for more MP3 players. The RIAA was not happy about this and turned their attention elsewhere as the MP3 player evolved, but we'll come back to them later. Portable music players became a huge market, with many companies beginning to release devices of all sorts of quality levels. I have fond memories of using some truly terrible devices that were barely functional but still did the job. But at the high end, things were different. Apple released the iPod with a highly successful marketing campaign that one could argue saved the company. White headphones became a status symbol that you had an iPod. But that wasn't the only high-end device. Sony was bringing their A game around this time with the PSP. In addition to games, it was also heavily media-focused, releasing movies on UMD and included a cabled media remote, making it work quite well with music. Too bad it used the expensive Memory Stick Pro format for storage. And my memory sticks were always full of other things, so like a lot of people, I didn't want to waste space on music. But Microsoft also had some devices in this market. They had been releasing Windows Mobile devices for years that were capable of playing audio. These were never really cool though, and never able to gain any wide market adoption. But having this software on hand and seeing the success of the iPod led Microsoft to the natural idea to release an iPod competitor. And you've likely heard of the infamous Zune. But that was not it. It was this, a Windows Mobile-based portable media center. Designed to leverage their existing Windows XP Media Center's capabilities, Microsoft aimed to create their own multimedia ecosystem. They didn't want to make their own hardware though, and instead partnered with other companies to release devices. Creative, Samsung, and iRiver were the ones who came out with these first. Today, we're looking at the iRiver, but the software experience would have been the same for all of these, which makes it somewhat difficult to find information on them now because most of the publications reviewed the Creative Zen and then ignored the rest. But I picked up a brand new iRiver PMC 120, and we will be getting the full experience for it. Let's start by looking at the box, which has some interesting choices. I initially thought this was Britney Spears or some other popular music artist at the time, but no, this is an adult film actress, which is an interesting way to market a portable video player. On that, this is a video player. When this device came out, the iPod Photo was the leading Apple product for $500 at the low end and was not able to play video. This could for the same price, but it was only 20 gigabyte compared to the iPod's 40 gigabyte, neither with the ability to add more storage. Other than that, we can see on the side of the box it supports MP3, like any player should, and WMA, which was Microsoft's file format for music. Getting it open, we are treated to a nice presentation for a device from this era, and aren't shorted on anything we could want. We get the player, a carry case, USB cable, video out cable, 5-volt barrel jack charger, and headphones, as well as a removable lithium-ion battery that, believe it or not, still works and has been holding a charge for over a week now as I write this script. Looking it over, it has a D-pad for navigation, media buttons on the right of the face, which after using I've decided are terrible because you can't tell them apart, a headphone port on the top as well as TV out on the bottom, and USB on the side. There is a dock connector on the bottom, but I do not believe that a dock was ever released. The first thing I did after this though was not turn it on. It was to go rip it apart because like all large capacity devices from this era, it uses a hard drive for storage. And I wanted to get that image while it hopefully still worked. One of my initial goals for this video was to preserve this device as best I can. And since this had never been used, which was backed up by the hard drive's smart data reporting 0 on-time hours, I wanted to get the initial state of the system saved. While pulling the hard drive, I also noticed that there was what seemed like a CMOS battery inside, and I opted to pull that out now rather than chance it leaking later and damaging the device. With that done though, I was ready to power it on for the first time. It puts you right into the main menu, and there is no initial setup, it seems. Actually, there are barely any options at all. There's some included sample videos and music, none of which I can really play, because it has a video of movie clips and real songs from artists like Johnny Cash. It does have a tutorial video overviewing the software, but it's 5 minutes long and features amazing editing like this transition from one subject to another.
Now you can take your favorite movies with you.
So we will be skipping that. The main menu has 4 areas: TV, music, pictures, and video. TV is both the most and least interesting part of this. This OS is called Portable Media Center, so you would think this must sync really well with Windows XP Media Center. But no, not really. I'll get to installing the software in a moment, but there's no way to sync anything from within Media Center. You must use Windows Media Player, and version 10 or above at that, which I will have a lot more to say later. This TV section is the only connection to Media Center because that can record TV. To copy TV recordings, I did try using the superior Windows Media Player 9, but it has no concept of TV and didn't work with the device in any reliable way. So I caved and installed 10 from the CD the player came with. There isn't anything else special on the CD, and I also got this player working fully with normal XP with the standard Media Player 10 installer, but I will have pretty much everything you have seen here on archive.org if you want to poke around the disk. With everything set up now and the player showing up correctly, I started transferring some of the music I already had on this computer over to it, and it didn't work. It throws an error on the player about it being missing or damaged. That's weird. Let's just copy the MP3 over through the file browser. Nope. The box says it does MP3, right? It does. But you know what else it says on here? This is a Microsoft PlaysForSure device. Something I didn't know about before picking this thing up, and wow did I step in it here. Remember how I said the RIAA started looking elsewhere earlier? Since they knew they couldn't take out the MP3 players directly, they instead turned to how these devices got music instead. They were going after the places people were getting MP3s from, like Napster or MP3.com. This led to the rise of decentralized services like LimeWire that were much tougher to take down. So a different approach started to be taken with the remaining legitimate services selling MP3s, DRM. Microsoft wasn't going to be able to get away with selling a non-DRM player without drawing the ire of the music industry. So they utilized a DRM scheme built into Windows XP and their own WMA file format. These files could have restrictions on what you could play them on, how many times you could play them, how long you were allowed to have access to them, and more. This DRM existed at the operating system level since Microsoft had control of the full software stack. They continued this control into media players with Janus and PlaysForSure. PlaysForSure was a certification for online stores to sell music files with Janus DRM and for devices to support it. The DRM on the players, from what I can find, also required the exclusion of playback of other media types on the device. I actually get an error trying to copy any unsupported files onto it. I'm not sure if MP3 fell into this as well. As a file format, it cannot natively support Janus DRM, but XP may have been able to track the files at the OS level as well. Either way, it doesn't matter. At no point have I been able to get MP3 encoded files to play on this device. And it was completely possible to have legitimate MP3s without DRM at this time. Amazon would even sell MP3s without DRM while you could still get one of these. But this is locked down with DRM so badly that those services just weren't an option. I went into this project from the start, initially wanting to make a point that it's a shame that these were forgotten, but no, I'll get the shovel if I have to, because products like this need to stay dead and buried. Now, as bad as using this device is with outside media sources, it isn't impossible to get music onto it. And hilariously, it's even easier to get videos to work with WMVs. I'm guessing that's because it wasn't as practical to share video files online, and the Motion Pictures Association was much slower to react as well. When this device was being reviewed by contemporary publications, there was criticism of the DRM surrounding it. And it was mentioned that the most practical, legitimate way to free files of the PlaysForSure DRM was to burn your purchased music to a CD and then rip it back to the computer. CDs, by their very nature, cannot have DRM for audio, so this would have worked to remove it. But it lost metadata and wasn't exactly cheap or easy. Now, I mentioned that this method was legitimate because while the earlier referenced lawsuit that saved the MP3 player meant you could back up media for personal use, it did not give you the right to break copy protection like DRM. DVD X-Copy here set this in stone when they lost a lawsuit after they sold a product to break DVD copy protection schemes. So legitimate methods of converting DRM protected music needed to get creative to do it. One method mentioned in this Computer World article was that it was possible to use the operating system to play back a file with DRM, but then record the audio being played to another file. I believe this is how Winamp's Disk Writer plugin worked at this time, which could record files being played back to another file after letting the Direct Show API in Windows do the decoding. But that only frees files you purchased with the DRM to work on other devices. How could you get files to work on this thing? Well, CDs were still an option as a gateway to this. Windows Media Player could rip CDs to WMA, and those gray area files could be copied to PlaysForSure devices. This has the same drawbacks of wasting a CD, but you also lose metadata like titles, album, and artist information, requiring it all be typed back in. For technical reasons, CDDB text doesn't match burned disks, and even CD text metadata doesn't work from commercial disks with it, so typing was unavoidable. If you didn't care about breaking the copy protection, programs to convert the files directly to WMA must have existed, but I couldn't get any working from this time. The Winamp Disk Writer plugin claims to support writing WMA, but it just threw an error with my testing. Living in the future though, I was able to get FFmpeg to create WMA files with metadata that will work on this thing. It was harder than it should have been for me because my music library is ripped from my large collection of CDs, and I've been very meticulous about adding album art, which FFmpeg would encode into WMAs as video, causing all new issues. Stripping the album art out would make it work, but I would have to go back to the files in Windows Media Player to re-add it. But that process does work, and it almost seems odd to say this, but I can confirm it still works with Windows 11 as well. But don't give Microsoft any credit here. This isn't impressive product support. This is the result of redundant neglect of modern Windows, and 11 ships with Windows Media Player 12 from 2013. It's a decade old, and actually closer in age to the iRiver than it is Windows 11 now. There is a new media player app as well that doesn't even know what portable devices are, so it's useless for this. And you do have to use media player to transfer the files. This thing communicates with the PC using MTP, and thanks to that standard, it is possible to put the files directly onto it. But it doesn't use metadata to sort the songs, and anything copied over that way is thrown into a massive unknown artist and album listing. So unless you only ever want to shuffle, you're gonna want to use media player to transfer files. All right, I finally got music and video onto this thing now. So what's it like to use? Well, it's fine, I guess. The software is actually one of the best portable music player interfaces I've ever used because it's right to the point and very smooth and responsive. But that's only because it's lacking basic features like file browsing. And if you handed me this without me seeing the startup, I would have no idea that it is based on Windows Mobile because it supports nothing from that and may as well be a completely different operating system. Sound quality is fine, but you're limited to WMAs, so that's as best as you're gonna get out of it. Videos play back well on it at least. The screen is 320 by 240, which is fine for the era, and I feel the screen is above average for quality. It also remembers where you were last playing a video, making it easy to start and stop watching something longer. But I think I'm out of positive things to say about the software now. The integrated kickstand is the only other nice thing physically, and even that wasn't fully thought out because the charging cable plugs in on the other side and just knocks it over. The media buttons are awful to use, like I mentioned. They are so smooth and all the same. Changing the volume in your pocket would be impossible because you can't feel where those buttons are and are just as likely to skip tracks since that's right next to them. Not that you could listen to it with it in your pocket. The headphone cable sticks out of the side for that orientation, and it's not exactly small, so you'd be trashing the cable and the connector trying to cram it into your pocket. Also, when you're listening to music, it never actually stops updating the display. Even with the backlight off, it is still showing the play time increasing, wasting battery life. Also, you can't turn it off. It is always in a standby mode and turns on the instant you put in a battery or plug it in. To round out its features, it has TV out, which is just composite, and while I would have been head over heels with that when I was younger at first, I also had an iPod video a little after this thing came out with that capability and slowly learned that the mix of 4:3 and 16:9 content and displays at the time made it a letterboxing and stretching nightmare. Being able to plug a second set of headphones into that port is kind of cool though. And those are my thoughts on it after using it. 440 words. This thing is so frustrating to me. The DRM nightmares, the squandered Windows Mobile OS, the overly video-focused physical layout just make it not only difficult to use, but bland and uninteresting overall. This thing should be awesome, but it just isn't. There is nothing memorable about it, but even that isn't why these devices were mostly forgotten. From what little I can find from articles about these, because they were so mixed in reviews even then and were leaving people lukewarm, the iRiver I have, the Creative Zen, and the Samsung Yep were all nearly identical, other than physical layout, Gen 1 PMC devices. The next year, Gen 2 devices came out with some more variety and larger capacities than 20 gigabytes. These supposedly use an updated version of the Portable Media Center software, but I can't find any information on the differences between them. But it hardly matters. The first generation devices launched in 2005. The second generation launched in 2006. You know what else launched in 2006? The Zune. Microsoft abandoned everything about Portable Media Center 2 years after the Zune was introduced. PlaysForSure DRM was canned and never worked with Zunes, and they killed the MSN marketplace for it in 2008, which meant you couldn't directly get music for your $500 PMC anymore. And that was it. Poof, gone. Portable Media Center and the ability to use it was replaced by something completely different, and no one cared. The iPod was stealing the show throughout the whole life cycle, and when the Zune came out, articles were written about it being the competitor to the iPod like PMC never even happened. This whole video project absolutely did not end up at the conclusion I expected. I still buy CDs to rip and use a dedicated portable media player daily. I am all about these devices and love looking back at previous models and playing with them for a while, but this one, I just couldn't wait to get behind me. Everything about it has been difficult to use in one way or another, both due to how the music industry was recoiling from the internet and from poor planning on Microsoft. And it fails to shine in any particular way. It couldn't find its place in the market 2 decades ago and was forgotten, and it couldn't muster any niche points now to make it endearing. When I'm done with this video, it's going back in the box and I will never think about it again, leaving it forgotten once more. The idea of the device is far more interesting than it ever was. This has left me interested in a different product segment at the time though. iRiver had a device that was nearly identical to the PMC 120 before it that, instead of running Windows software, ran Linux. Now I bet that one is far more interesting, and I'm looking for one of those or something like it because I've got an itch for a high-end mid-2000s non-iPod player that I'm looking to scratch, and there has to be something out there that can do it. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that look at the overall disappointing iRiver PMC 120 and Portable Media Center. If you want to help support the channel, you can find me on Patreon, but for now, that's it, and I will see you next time.